Why can't we just say anything?
Say
With Keena B.
people just say anything.
My name is Keena, owner and operator of Bwembyas Market in Quincy, Florida. We are an art gallery and gift market, and we focus on showcasing emerging Black artists, but we also host a lot of different types of events. And Miss Due was so gracious enough to say yes to this virtual book discussion. She has a busy schedule. And I want to begin by doing a brief introduction, although you all may be familiar with her work, just for those who may not be. Tananarive Due is an award-winning author, educator, and one of the most influential voices in fiction today. Her work blends history, horror, and cultural truths. She also teaches Afrofuturism and Black horror at UCLA, helping shape the next generation of storytellers and thinkers in these spaces. Her presence is especially meaningful for us today because of her direct connection to Quincy through her family, including her mother, civil rights activist Patricia Stevens Due. Her acclaimed novel, The Reformatory, was inspired by her great uncle's experience at the Dozier School for Boys. And today's discussion will cover The Reformatory, which gives us a chance to engage with a story that is tied to this region and its history in a very real way. Just a little bit about The Reformatory. It is a historical novel set in the Jim Crow era, Jackson County specifically. It follows a 12-year-old Robert Stevens Jr., who was wrongfully sent to a reformatory school for boys after kicking a white landowner's son. And he kicked the son because he was defending his sister Gloria. And you would go on later on in the book to find out that Robert has a gift and can see ghosts, which they call haints, Haints. And the story is basically about his survival, his battle for survival at the school. But I would also say that it's also equally about Gloria's story of coming of age in her own sense of being. I actually found myself really wanting to hear and read a lot about Gloria while reading the book. I kind of uh, um, just really found myself attached to her story more so than Robert's. But Ms. Dew, if you could just give us all the information about why the reformatory and I mean, I read all the notes in the book about the research that you all have done and all the connections and the historical aspects that you had tied to it. But why did you write that book?
Thank you for that. And what a lovely introduction. And I have to say, as someone who visited Quincy many, many, many times, let's say more regularly about 10 years ago, I'm so thrilled that your store and gallery are there. And the community is very lucky to have you there. So I love that. And I love that this event, this is why I said yes, because Quincy was where my mother basically was born.
Mhm.
Gloria is named after my mother. My mother's middle name is Gloria, was Gloria, Patricia Gloria Stevens Dew. She was the first superhero of my life. So if you felt an attachment to Gloria, it's because Gloria really was standing in for my mother's spirit. And when I say that quite literally, I mean, if I had to wonder what would Gloria do next in this situation, all I had to do was think about what I thought my mother would have done. And when my agent made a suggestion, maybe Gloria should sort of flirt with the son of, to try to help her brother. I was like, no, my mother never would have done that. Um, so it was really like a North Star. It kept me from going astray. The whole point, I mean, it's a long story, but the whole point is that soon after my mother passed away in 2012, while my family was very much in shock and mourning, she was such a big figure. It's still hard to believe she's gone. That photo on the wall behind me, the poster "Freedom in the Family," is from the book we co-wrote about the civil rights era. I just did a talk, Florida A&M University, about her history with my aunt Priscilla Krause being part of the first jail in the country in the student sit-in movement, where they stayed in jail rather than pay their fines. And it helped bring more publicity to the growing civil rights movement in the 1960s. She was tear gassed. She wore dark glasses because of tear gas her whole life. Until she died almost because of irritation and sensitivity to light after being tear gassed in 1960. So after she passed away, we got a call from, believe it or not, the Florida State Attorney's Office, which at the time was run by a woman named Pam Bondi. I'm going to say no comment beyond that, but it was very interesting that Bondi's office was very involved in helping to push in favor of researchers who wanted to exhume remains from the Dozier School for Boys in Marianna, Florida. There was a lot of resistance from the local powers that be in Marianna. They considered it embarrassing that there was so much attention. There had been news stories for years about the abuse of boys. Survivors had written memoir after memoir. I had never heard of the Dozier School for Boys when I got that call in 2013. I had no idea that she had a great uncle named Robert Stevens, who unfortunately died there in 1937. This was the information I was given in that call, not from Bondi herself, but someone in her office who was very compassionate and, wanted to reach out to family members to get permission to begin exhumation at the site. As she wrote in a very impassioned letter that is in the book by Aaron Kimmerly called We Carry These Bones, to help bring closure to survivors and their families. I'm just going to leave that right there. I'm just going to leave that because it's such a departure from the kind of attitude she has now. Uh, a huge departure. So I don't know what happened there, but that was the history. And I'm just going to tell the history how it happened. On the basis of that call, my father, who is still alive, he's 91 years old. That's who I was in Quincy with recently. He was much younger then, and we were able to go to meetings like at the actual Dozier School and meet survivors, black and white, who are now old men living in trauma from the things that happened to them when they were children at this facility. And I knew immediately, I have to write a book about this. I have to write a book about this. And I had written one nonfiction book with my late mother, and I flirted for a minute with telling it as a nonfiction story. But I've already told you the ending of the story, and that certainly was not something I wanted to sit with over the amount of time it would take me to research and find, try to find it. I didn't know anything about Robert Stevens. I'm not even sure my mother knew she had an uncle. I later, in the research process, when I decided to write it as a novel, both to give Robert a better story and to be able to sort of fictionalize Mariana and add ghosts, honestly, just to make it a more palatable story. Because ghosts are less scary than human monsters for me. So, like Robert, who's afraid to go to this place because he's heard it's haunted, the reader thinks, oh, this is horror because of the ghost. No, it's horror because of history. It's horror because of the human monsters at this place. But as I discovered while I was researching the book, I had a relative who was named after Robert Stevens by his brother. And this young man had no idea for whom he was named. And I really feel like there was so much grief, not just for Robert Stevens' family, but all the families, black and white, who were subjected to this place, that sometimes they just buried it, just buried the grief, never spoke of him, never discussed him. Um, and I was just heartbroken about the story. And I made him a little bit younger because the real life Robert Stevens was 15. And that is still a child. But I thought he would be a little more empathetic if I made him 12 instead. I think 12 is a very important coming of age where you have one foot in childhood and one foot in the better perceptions that we get as an adults. That's the age where you're starting to see your parents' flaws a little more quickly. You're starting to like move slightly away from innocence toward adulthood. And that was where I wanted Robert to be, kind of on the cusp of adolescence, because I'd written some stories previously set in a town I called Gracetown,
Mm.
which is not based on the real life Graceville, which I didn't even know about until after I started publishing my
I was
story.
wondering about that.
I
I
was
said,
calling it Graceville, and then I realized, oh shoot, there's a real Graceville. So I changed it to Gracetown just because I did not want any confusion that people
Mhm.
thought I was talking about them. And in those stories, which appear in both of my short story collections, the first one is called Ghost Summer. The other one is called The Wishing Pool. I had established that in Gracetown, children have a special relationship with magic, psychic abilities. They can see ghosts, they interact with creatures. And then as you become an adult, it fades and you kind of start to forget. It's almost like they say the pain of childbirth. You forget. I don't know if that's true. My son was adopted at birth, but that was where I wanted Robert to be. He's still young enough that he can see the ghosts, and he has a gift. Not only is he young enough, but he actually has a special connection with ghosts. He's seen the ghost of his mother from the very first page of the story because he's lost his mother, which represented my grief after losing my mother, right? But I didn't just want to tell the story of a boy at a haunted reformatory who is going to learn that the real monsters were human, because the true monster is Jim Crow.
Mhm.
The true monster is the bureaucracy of a system where people would just fill out forms, do their little job, and send these children into this concentration camp where some of them were not going to go home. And most of them were going to be beaten bloody in this whipping shed. And some of them were going to be sexually assaulted in what they called a rape room. And believe me when I tell you, I softened this story as much as I could to make
You
it
did.
palatable.
You did.
I
I have a
softened it
grateful.
because if you've read, and I have a list of readings in the end from actual survivors, which is another reason I really didn't want to write it as nonfiction. It wasn't my story. They had their own testimonies to give, so let them tell their story. And I'll just do what I do, which is write fiction, you know. But there were things I read. I don't even like to discuss like the things that I read, because I had to hold that. I was traumatized actually working on the book. And it took me 7 years to write as a result of that. Some of it was, yes, I was moving into television writing and getting some opportunities in screenwriting I'd never had before. But I can't use that as an excuse. A lot of it was so emotionally difficult to be in the world of this story. It was emotionally difficult to be in 1950 period, and it was emotionally difficult to be at the reformatory. So it would not be a complete story if it was just from a 12-year-old boy's point of view. He doesn't have the perspective or the context to fully understand what's happening. I needed a character on the outside who could paint the true monster, which was the bureaucracy, which was the system. A courthouse that is supposed to be about justice that has a white only sign. Like you can't even enter this courthouse through the front door. You can't enter the courtroom through the front entrance. You have there's segregation. So how can you have justice under segregation? The whole thing is a sham. I mean, really. So I wanted to expose the sham of what criminal so-called justice was in the 1950s and by extension today, because make no mistake, I really did intend, even though this is a historical novel, for it to represent sort of a microcosm of our very, very flawed criminal justice system today. I
Right.
mean, I was starting to flirt with abolition, and I still, in my heart, believe that we could probably empty our prisons of about 60% of the people there. But current events have taught me that I am not an abolitionist because there are so many people I want to see in jail right now. I'm
Yeah.
a
I
little
have
mad
to
about it.
say that
I was trying to be an abolitionist, but doggone it, I believe some people just need to be locked up.
yes, I have to say that everything you're saying rings true. I saw the notes of how you were speaking about the injustice of the system itself when talking about how people were arrested for vagrancy if they weren't hiring themselves out to work, and it basically putting them under a different level of servitude.
Yes.
It also um, brought more perspective to me. A lot of the historical references that you had in there, I had to go and do more research on when you mentioned the Mariana riots and Claude Neal and Ruby McCullen, to have to go and do research around those individuals. It's like, oh, these are real people who, and the hanging tree and so on, all those references that you dropped in there as ways for us to be aware of the history that is surrounding in this area um, was very, very enlightening to me. Like I think I had like things pushed to the back of my brain, but that made me push them forward. And it just
Mm.
brings a whole new perspective to the area itself. Um, when you talk about Gloria and the outside world, having a perspective of the outside world, it was very much needed. I think when you said it took you so long to write the book, I can understand it. I had trepidation about reading the book because of
Mm.
the trauma. I was like, I'm about to read a book that is going to invoke trauma. And
Mm.
quite honestly, the child in me did not want to be scared. You know, but then once I started reading, I was like, okay, this is okay. You're just understanding the history. And I took note of the fact that you did not write as much about the rape room as you could have written.
Oh, no,
And
no,
you were
no. There
very
was no
gracious
way.
about
There were
that.
things I knew from the very beginning that I was not going to subject my character or the readers to.
Hmm.
I wanted to walk the line of being true to the history so that anyone who had been there or had a loved one who was there would not feel like I was sugarcoating
Hmm.
what that experience was. But at the same time, this was how adding the fantasy element. There are two things. One was adding the fantasy element so that the ghosts, haints, could represent dead children without me having to show scene after scene of children being killed and hurt, so that's they're already dead. So they're ghosts. And that's a sort of a gentler way to introduce the idea of how many people have died here. And the other thing I think was Robert's superpower, which is his childlike sense of hope and optimism. Like he was looking for a way out from the second he got in that place. But then again, ooh, shiny. Let me play with the steering wheel because he's a child. Let's run across the field and race. Let's go play in the freezer, which I never would have done. Okay, that's first of all, that's the difference between an adult and a child right there. I would have been just sort of sobbing under my bed the whole time. And I think, although granted, he would have needed a lot of therapy, children do have this ability to maintain a sense of play and joy even during traumatic experiences, or can, maybe not every child, but so that really helped get me through was being in Robert's point of view. Gloria was more like me, like on the outside, I can't see the ghosts. Maybe sometimes I get a little whisper of the future, like when I meet Ruby McCullum, I get a whisper of her future. When I meet Harry T. Moore, I get a whisper of his future because this book is set about a year, maybe a year and a half before the death of Harry Timor and his wife Harriet, who were bombed on Christmas Day, I think in 1951, if I'm not mistaken. So she can feel sort of these whispers, but she's just all about business. And that was my mom. I was just listening to Freedom in the Family with my dad on the road, and how she just stood up to people. She was unafraid. She was so courageous, and that's more so than I am, frankly. And that's Gloria, that she was just like, yeah, let's go. Let's talk to the
I have
judge. Let's do what we got to do.
I have to say that because she kind of started out, and let me take the time. Those of you who are listening, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat or just raise your hand, and then we can unmute you and you can dive in here as well. I have to say, Gloria to me started out a bit timid. This is, I think, the part that I connected to was that she was a good girl who was taught to be a good girl and was
Hmm.
taught that her intellect would kind of save her, and then had like to me, my understanding, like this evolution of realizing that just being a good girl wasn't enough, and that just knowing the law wasn't enough, that at some point you had to evolve into the I'm going to protect my brother regardless of what
Yes, she
is
goes, I
done.
mean, that's a very interesting observation, and I haven't thought of it that way. But as you were talking, because I did consider it to be sort of a microcosm of sort of the real experience of Black America, even
Mhm,
that what the kids call now respectability politics,
mhm,
right? So if you look at protest photos from the 1960s, the men are wearing suits and ties, and the women are wearing dresses. Okay, nobody's wearing a sweatshirt or a hoodie or jeans, none of that, because that was very much a part of the mindset. HBCUs to this day, some students still dress that way.
mhm,
So that was part of the mindset of what people call respectability politics today, which should have made sense. I mean, it should have, I mean, on one level, it should have worked, right? Like, so if if racists are claiming that Black people don't have the intellectual capacity, Black people are not civilized enough, Black people are not intelligent enough, then if you show people that you are intelligent, you show people that you did, then that should soften up. Like that's the same mindset when people enlisted for World War II, thinking, okay, well, if we serve, they'll have to treat us like real Americans. And then you come back from the war in uniform and get lynched.
mhm,
And so as a people, we've had to figure out, oh, it isn't about not being intelligent enough.
mhm,
It isn't about not being civilized enough. It's about people don't want to compete with Black America and for jobs and hate, on the part of people who are racist. Just hate. They don't want to see it. Like if they could snap up their fingers, we would just not be here. I mean, it's hate. So you can't combat hate with a suit and tie and good manners and a
mhm,
polite attitude, right? So that's, I think, Gloria's journey through this was trying to be the good girl even though she's struggling. And I love that scene in the courthouse because my dad, he has dementia now. That's a
mhm,
little worse. But back then, I could just, because my father is a civil rights attorney and he practiced in the 1960s. And he, a story he tells all the time is about going into the chambers of well, not the chambers, rather, the office of a Mississippi sheriff who, by all rumor, was the sheriff who tipped off the Ku Klux Klan about where to find James Chaney, Michael Schwerner and Andrew Goodman, who were murdered during Freedom Summer in 1964. The movie Freedom, what's the name of that movie? Mississippi Burning. It's not a good movie, but it's based on that incident. So it was a very famous killing of civil rights activists, and my dad was in the office with that sheriff, where the sheriff looked at him as kind of an oddity. You're a lawyer, and you're not like other Black people he's ever known before. He's got this curiosity about him. And I said, Dad, what do you say? Like Gloria, I'm writing a scene where Gloria has miraculously convinced a civil rights attorney who's named for my father, whose name is John Dorsey Due Jr. My father's name is middle name is Dorsey. Um, she's won an audience with the judge. But this is 1950 where you have no rights. So what do you say in that meeting? What can you possibly say? And he gave me some thoughts. You try to disarm the judge with humor. And he said, remember, these judges, they were, upholding this racist system, but that's not how they saw themselves.
mhm,
So you can't come from that direction. You have to come from a human to human direction and try to find that sort of common ground. So we're going to talk about the weather and we're going to talk about boxing, and we're gonna, and Gloria has no patience for this. Like, what's this chit chat? Like, and this is the same dynamic, by the way, with young people today. Young people cut right to the chase. That's why they're the first ones out with the protest signs, because they don't have to wait for the problem to come into their home to call it out. They don't have to wait for it to feel personal to call it out. It could be it's happening all the way across the world, but it's wrong and I'm going to hold the sign and I'm going to say so. And just like in the 1960s, when my mother and other activists were suspended from Florida A&M and, they are expelled or tear gassed, society today still mistreats our student activists who are just trying to hold up and say, hey, maybe this is wrong, And it seems like it doesn't affect us, but it is going to affect us because it affects humanity. Children have that attitude, and I'll call her a child because she's only about 17. So she's just not in the mood for the small talk and the chit chat, and let's not say what we're all thinking about. That boy made a pass at me, and my brother was trying to protect me. Whoa! Now the meeting is blown up because she told the truth.
Mhm.
The lawyer was making some headway, but Gloria blows up that meeting by telling the truth. And even today, how hard is it to get accountability for sexual advances and downright sexual assault, you know? So it definitely was not going to happen in 1950 when she's a black teenager making an accusation against the most powerful family in the town. That was a non-starter. And that is her moment, I guess you would call it, of radicalization, where it's like, okay, we went through the system, we tried to use the system, and the system rejected us. The system is not going to listen. And now we got to take matters in our own hands.
Right. I like the quote that you have in I read it on Kindle, so it's like page 329. They wear you down one wrong at a time. That
Mm,
she quoted, I believe she said she was quoting her mother.
mm,
Um, it's like,
mm.
okay, because it's never just one big thing. It's like drops of things that they
Yes. And,
do.
and in contemporary times, it's the drops sometimes are so hidden and so minuscule that you're always asking yourself, was that a drop of thing? Or is that, you know,
Mhm.
you're not sure. Is that person following me in the store because they think I'm going to steal or because they want to help me? You know?
Right. It puts
So,
like a bit of a paranoia um that you end up having. And these days and times, you try really hard not to have that sense of paranoia.
absolutely. And one of the things I want to point out that first of all, this book has performed it's despite the difficulty, like you look at the back of the book and like, "Ooh, this is probably going to be a hard read, you know." But despite that, and despite the fact that people say they have to put it down and step away sometimes and or they're mad because they're crying or whatever it has sold more than any other book I've ever written by
Mhm.
quite a wide margin.
Mhm.
It's pretty extraordinary. In publishing, they give you in advance, sort of guessing what you might earn. And I've had books that never earn that money back. Like that was it. I still owe money on it. So I'm not getting any royalties. This book earned out within 3 months
Mm.
and has continued to sell. And when I was on tour, one of the things that really jumped out at me was how mixed the audience was. I mean, I've been publishing horror since
Mhm.
1995.
Mhm.
And when I started publishing, most of my events were at independent Black bookstores, and I would say 90% of my readers were Black women.
Mhm.
And something has changed. I think it's me in part of it is the horror genre itself has become so democratized. I have theories about why that is. I think there are some editors who've really been sort of activist in putting voices in front of people, like Stephen Graham Jones, who's like one of the most powerful horror writers right now, is Indigenous. And that was something that never would have happened when I started publishing. Um, and I think it's that horror fans like novelty. I think the times we're living in are making people curious about how we got here. So the historical aspect may be drawing that readership. But I also, I had never read To Kill a Mockingbird before I started writing this. Somehow I missed getting assigned that novel. And I wanted to read it when I was working on this because it's obviously a very influential book set in the Jim Crow South about the criminal justice system, and there would be a lot of things that I was interested in seeing from that perspective. And I think maybe for some readers who are familiar with To Kill a Mockingbird, that was something that was kind of like an entryway drug for a book like The Reformatory because one of the things that happened that left these kids alone was that their father was run out of town on a fake charge, which is the same. I mean, in To Kill a Mockingbird, the whole novel is centered around um, the father defending a Black man who has been unjustly accused of a crime.
Mhm.
So that story is sort of from the point of view of the attorney, and I would say from the and Scout, the daughter, from the outside in, right? And the reformatory, in many ways, I really wanted any readers to experience is looking at sort of a similar injustice, but from the inside out. Like, this is what it feels like to be the family of the accused. This is what it feels like to be in the jail, even though you're just a child. And maybe because of that, it has really just resonated with readers of all backgrounds. And also, I didn't intentionally like say, oh, I better have some white characters in this so it will sell. It was just in the process of unpacking her life. She works for a woman who's the daughter of what was considered a liberal councilman who might have even been murdered by the Klan.
Mhm.
The social worker is Jewish and, has his own experience with discrimination coming like right out of the World War II era and the Holocaust and that empathy. And I know from the Civil Rights era, I said Michael Schwerner and Andrew Goodman. Michael Schwerner was in the South wearing a yarmulke when he was murdered. So there had been this coalition between Black people and Jewish people during the Civil Rights era that I wanted to pay homage to, but with limitations because these are also marginalized people. Like there's a queer white woman, she's marginalized in her way. There's a Jewish man, he's marginalized in his way. So they're helpful, but they're not steering the story and they're not able or don't feel they're able to do more, which leads basically to Gloria and Robert having to take control of their own destinies, which is really what you want to do in any novel. You want your characters to be. It can't be someone gives you freedom. You have to win your freedom.
Oh, good. You said a lot of things that I hope we could touch on. A reminder that if, while you're watching, if you have a question, go ahead, just put your hand up in the, okay, we have one here. And you can unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. I'm gonna try not to fangirl uh, too much because I'm really excited to be here. I kind of had a really quick comment and a really quick question.
Can you
Um,
say your name and
oh, sorry.
where you're from?
My name is Annie. And I'm in London.
Okay, excellent.
Wonderful.
Um, I I want to thank you so much for organizing this talk. I think it's so important. It's been really good to kind of because I've read the book a few times and I've really enjoyed it, but
Wow.
having this kind of like insider knowledge, like basically straight from you is priceless. So I just want to thank you for that.
Thank
Um,
you.
and also I wanted to just ask you something. Thank you so much for being the writer that you are. You kind of made me cry a little bit when you was talking about your mother because the book that I wrote, which is also my debut novel, which is also horror, I didn't realize it was a love letter to my own mother until I'd almost finished it.
Mm.
And I just wanted to ask you because I'm really struggling with agents who don't seem to know where to place me because I write literary horror. And my characters, my main protagonists are black. I'm black, and so I think there is a thing of where do we put you in? Like having to try and find some sort of pigeonhole, which is
Hmm.
really which I really resist because even though it's horror, I think one of the things that I love about your writing and one of the things I love about Marlon James as well is the fact that it's horror, but it's also so much more than that. It's so much richer, and
Thank you.
I think there's something about the black experience that is layered because you were just talking about being followed around a shop. I mean that's horrific when you really think about it. When you really strip it down, there's something quite horrific about that being almost pursued by someone else. There's just a perspective I think that sometimes is missing, and I just wondered how you navigate that kind of, especially in the publishing world, not fitting really neatly in one place, being literary but also being horror. How do you navigate that?
That's a beautiful question, and a difficult question. I don't know that I even have a definitive answer for you. I know in the United States, for example, as I said originally, because I was published in the 90s originally, there was a whole Black arts renaissance going on in film and in books. So a commercial Black author, they didn't care it was horror. It was just like, oh, it's a page turner. Let's throw it up against the wall and see if it'll stick kind of attitude. And a lot of people I know started publishing during that era. And then that dried up. And now it's horror that is sort of at the forefront of who my fans are, I would say. But with the caveat that even with my upcoming book, Maisie Wood, which is definitely horror, I mean, part of it is like survival creature horror in the woods, but there's also a backstory in old Hollywood. So what they're doing is they're calling it a literary thriller. They're
Hmm.
even staying away from that word horror because they're looking for the widest possible audience, right? I don't know what the current publishing situation is in the UK. I don't know if you are shopping to American publishers or publishers in the UK, but there is a writer who teaches at, I think, well, I want to say I should know this because I spoke there, Cambridge. Yeah, she's the academic director of creative writing at Cambridge. Yvonne Battle Felton is her name.
Mhm.
I'm going to write her name in the chat just because you might want to figure out how to get in touch with her. And I know she recently published a book that, like maybe you're describing, it has sort of horror and supernatural elements, but also what I would call literary elements, right? So it's sort of again bridging those two audiences, and it is difficult. That's not in your imagination. So I don't know if you have an agent, but you might investigate trying to sell it in the United States as well as in the UK in case you have a better chance because we've tenderized it a little bit more here. You know, that idea because between Jordan Peele and Sinners and horror is very, very big here right now. And black horror, while maybe not as popular as it was, say, when Get Out first came out, still has definitely fixed a place for itself as a subgenre, a very firm subgenre in the United States. And I just don't know what's happening in the UK. But I wish you luck, and you may need an agent to help you for sure.
Thank you, Annie, for that question. That's
And as
awesome.
a matter of fact, I'm going to put something in chat, any that might be helpful to you or any of you. My husband and I started a free social media site for writers. It's called lifewrite.com. And we also give free Zooms every week. Every Friday, we do a free Zoom where people can come and ask us any questions. So if there's something I didn't answer today, please do join lifewrite.com. We say it's for joy scrolling and community. Um, and be sure to join us there. I saw a question in chat I just have from Mia. I just have to answer. Yes, my upcoming novel, Maisie Wood, definitely is based from a short story, Incident at Bear Creek Lodge. And I wrote another story called Return to Bear Creek Lodge. And then I was like, you know what? This feels like maybe it's a backstory to a novel. So that's what I did.
Okay, awesome. Awesome. I just realized I wasn't seeing those questions. I'm glad you see them.
Yeah.
Motorola says, I wish I had researched this book. I'm here on my work plantation trying desperately to hold it together. You're okay, Motorola. It's all right. Um, okay, that was the one you just read from Mia. And then Annie. Okay, trying to get an agent. So you'll follow the liferight.com. Awesome.
Yeah,
That's
we have
wonderful
500 members.
information.
We're
That's
not
wonderful.
playing around. Yeah,
Yes,
it's a
ma'am.
vital site.
I had a question, and I'm trying to bring it back to me because you mentioned something about the secondary characters, um, that brought it to me. But Haddock himself,
Mm.
the warden, superintendent, he was more like a conglomerate of a bunch of people. He wasn't a
I'm
specific
not trying to
person.
get sued, so yes, he was.
And then Miss Hamilton, her character as a veteran, and then
Yes.
her spouse, I think you mentioned earlier, speak to that about why she was included in this particular.
Um, Interestingly enough, I mean, I wanted to have, I don't even know how to begin to answer this question, as you can tell. I think it's hard for people to understand how influential the Dozier School was in
Mm,
Marianna, Florida. Like, everybody worked there. I mean, so I'm sure a lot of people didn't know exactly what was happening. Like, only a few people would have known about the rape room, for example.
mm,
More people would have known about the whipping shed, which, by the way, that was during a time when it was illegal to flog adult prisoners,
mm,
but they were flogging children. And I'm sure everybody had their reasons for working there, feeling like they were. It's part of the. It's a fiber. It was too big to fail. It was cornfields and printing press and employing teachers and custodians and groundskeepers. I mean, just so I wanted to look at the cross section of the kinds of people who might work at a facility like this. Mrs. Hamilton, who's named after my mother's stepfather, who taught her music and her love for music. And my mother played the trumpet. And for a while, I played the trumpet with my mother. We used to play little duets. Not well, me anyway, but yes.
mm,
Yeah, the graves were unmarked graves, like dogs, honestly. They dispose of these children. Um, so she's someone, and there was an army brigade, a music brigade where she could have been a part. So I wanted to use sort of also that history, like what would someone do who's returning to their town? They have this VA loan, to get their little house, but she wants to make a difference in the community, teaching music to prisoners. That's something I could see myself doing, right? But she's in over her head. She doesn't realize what she's getting into, and that's the kind of place where you really can't make a difference from within because the whole idea of it is corrupt. And then all the way up to Warden Haddock. And he is either a sociopath or a psychopath. I get them confused. But he is someone who has been hurting animals, killed his little baby sister, like his whole life he's been violent and terrible. But I also didn't want him to be cartoonish. So when you're creating a villain, or at least when I'm creating a villain, I wanted to give him qualities that were a little messy, a little incompatible. And one of the things about him was because he's a psychopath or a sociopath, he doesn't follow social norms. He's not a regular person. So he will just call it like he sees it, much in the way a child would. He can see that Robert's father was set up and was scapegoated, and that the crime he was committed of was most likely committed by this woman's boyfriend. He can see that his black and second in command Boone is more loyal and maybe smarter than like most of the people who work for him. So he's not buying into that idea of like innate racial superiority, like so on one level, he comes across as a progressive, but it's not because he wants black people to do well or he wants to change the system. It's just like he's calling it like he sees it. The
mhm,
world is his as far as he's concerned. He's the one who's superior to everybody else. He's not trying to create equality. People are just victims to him for the most part. Uh, but I thought that nuance, like that he would speak, like he's the first character to speak the truth
yeah.
about what happened to Robert's father in a way that Robert himself would not dare speak it out loud.
Mm.
In the way Gloria's employer herself is too afraid to say publicly outside of her little circle. So people will whisper, oh, this is all lies, but they won't put it on a sign and picket the sheriff's office.
It did
Um,
seem as though a lot of the characters, as you mentioned earlier, they were okay with, it was almost like they danced around the issue more so than wanting to attack it head on. They
exactly.
wanted to be able to say they did something without actually doing something. If that,
Well, I
yeah.
feel like it was a genuine desire, but sort of a limited vision of how to carry it out. Like if
Right.
they're it just,
A
and
very
I
real
think
danger for themselves because Miss Anne's character was threatened. She actually was threatened
Yeah, the
by her
sheriff
father.
told her in certain terms, I hope you don't get hurt like your father. I was like, whoa, I mean, there'd been a rumor that maybe the Klan killed her father when he came out against lynching publicly.
Mhm.
But that's the first time, and this sheriff, believe me, is a lot milder than some of the depictions of sheriffs I saw in my research. Like there's a book, one of my really, where is it? Devil in the Grove, the story of the Groveland Boys by Gilbert King. Oh my goodness.
And that's
That sheriff was like a monster out of a movie. Like that is
by
the
Rafa.
worst
So that's real.
story. Like years after the fact, he finally managed to catch up to that last freed suspect and kill him. Like what? So I made my sheriff like more of a politician sheriff who's trying to navigate like these racial lines. Like he wants to come across like he's a friend of the black community, but he can't come across like he's too soft because then the white community of racists would take matters into their own hands. So he's trying to navigate this like a politician. But when he leans close to Miss Anne, he tells his truth.
Mhm.
He knows
Now,
good, and he hasn't prosecuted anybody for killing her father, but he knows they did. He probably knows everybody who did it.
mhm. Okay, there's a question here in the chat from Lindsay. Did you want to ask Lindsay? No? Okay. She says, can you talk more about the legal issues you had to navigate? You mentioned the warden being a composite character and joked about being sued. Was that feel real? If so, how did it affect the writing and editing process?
Well, I mean, I made the decision very quickly that I wanted to fictionalize the story. Once I decided I'm writing it as a novel, Gracetown seemed like the perfect place to tell it. And that really, to me, felt like it gave me all of the protection I would need. I mean, there was one of the wardens had a very obvious disability. I forget what it was, a limp or one arm or something that I was very careful to keep away from, so that no one from a real family would speak up or object or try to sue or any of that. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, there are so many witnesses, there were so many memoirs, there's been so much testimony that I mean, I guess good luck suing me if 'cause, the boys are dead, the graves are there. I mean, it happened, but no one went to jail. No one went to jail. No one was arrested. That place was plagued with complaints from the minute it opened its doors. Like it opened up in what was the year? It was like somewhere around 1900. It was almost open for a little more than 100 years. And almost from the very beginning, there were complaints. Oh, you're chaining these boys to the wall. Oh, by the way, they're just orphans. Like maybe you're a 5-year-old orphan, but they've got you chained to the wall. And complaint after complaint after complaint for more than 100 years, and they couldn't get that place shut down. So legally, unfortunately, the people who perpetrated these acts and their descendants don't really have anything to fear from me
Mm.
because no one has had the will to prosecute. And,
I want you to be able to speak about your upcoming novel a little bit, but before we move to that, can you give me a sense of what it felt like when you finally completed the writing?
that's a great
And
question. I'm telling you, this was a bear to write. And in the meantime, Colson Whitehead, one of my favorite writers, had come out with the Nickel Boys, which was also based around the same facility, which was, very difficult for me as a writer 4 years into my process, feeling like, oh, if Colson Whitehead's written it, I won't even be able to sell this book. And my agent told me that wasn't true. Keep writing. Thank goodness. I think in some ways I was looking for an off ramp, like, oh, well, I guess I can't do it now. I published it as a short story just to sort of, which is something I advise my writing students when you're working on a long work.
Mhm.
Break off a piece, publish it as a short story, establish your IP, make sure people get to read a little bit of it. The thing that made me finish it though was COVID 2020,
Mm,
the shutdown. When I started to think I might literally possibly die. Now, I didn't have COVID, but I'm quite the hypochondriac. So I was terrified of getting COVID before the vaccine. And people were on ventilators and all kinds of terrible things were happening back then. You all remember. So that got me into gear. That got me into gear. I created a writing chart that
mhm,
I put on my wall. I had a quota of 3 to 5 pages a day I wanted to finish. And I had to write how many pages I wrote per day. Some days it was zero, some days it was five, some days it was two, some days it was R for just pure revision, but I could not pretend I
mm,
was working on it if I wasn't working on it. It was staring me in the face. And that was what it took. That was what it took for me to get my book done. And what a feeling. And when I tell you, it was an incredible feeling. And the way I write is I polish as I go. So I don't usually have a situation where I turn it in and my editor has a whole lot of feedback. The only feedback I got was that he wanted me to add a chapter at the end because my original ending was Robbie, Gloria, and Ms. Lottie riding away in the truck.
mm,
That was what I was writing toward. That was the moment that completed the story for me. He got away. But my editor was like, no, we need to see them land safely on the other side. And I had to agree with him. So I did add the chapter about the train station and being reunited with their father.
mm. Yeah, the train station really did, and the travel up and the way that you incorporated like the realities of just everyday life within it was really great. I had, from my own perspective. So I
Thank you. I
appreciate
really, I
that.
really tried. Well, that's part of the trick of writing horror is if you make the realistic details realistic enough,
Mhm.
then your reader has to accept the rest.
Mm. So tell
I
us
mean, they have no
about
choice.
your upcoming book.
Sorry?
Tell us about your upcoming book.
Absolutely. Well, you can hardly shut me up about it. I mean, I'm supposed to be trying to start writing another book, to come after it, which, by the way, is going to be a spiritual sequel to the Reformatory. I
Oh.
haven't even written this one yet, though. It'll either be called Misery Swamp, which is a term from the book, or The Fisherman. I haven't picked it, but just in a nutshell, that yet to be written book is really wrestling with that question of what happens when evil is exposed but unpunished.
Mm.
So it'll be new characters, references to characters you met in the Reformatory, but it's new contemporary characters dealing with the legacy of a literal curse that has happened in the wake of this place. But Maisie Wood, hey, I did write a short story called Incident at Creek Lodge for an anthology called Other Terrors, which was like marginalized horror writers. And that was a story about a young boy in the 1970s who spends a weekend at a mountain retreat with his sickly grandmother, who was a movie star in the 1940s. But unfortunately, when you were a movie star as a black woman in the 1940s, sometimes that meant you were taking very demeaning roles. And I wanted to show a glimpse of her trauma from the choices she made to have her success in Hollywood, the shame she was carrying about some of those choices and what it did to her. And I added it like randomly kind of a creature in the snow that represents her rage and grief, right? So with that backstory, Maisie Wood is about that same little boy as a much older man. He's 60 years old. His wife is 45. They have two teenage daughters, and he's finally taking his family for the very first time to his grandmother's lodge. They've never been because he has shut her out of his life. He doesn't even like thinking about her. Many, many reasons. If you read the short story, you'll see why she's not his favorite person. And let's just say that the creature that he thought he saw as a child is not only still there, but it's much, much bigger now. And
Mm.
that's what Maisie Wood is about.
Okay, all right. Any last questions? Because
I
we're
mean, I did promise some folks that I was going to do a short reading.
you did. Okay, yes.
I did. So I'm just going to do like a really quick reading, if you don't mind, to
I
sort of
don't
close
mind at
this
all. I
out.
appreciate your time.
There's one I just did from the judge's chambers from Gloria's point of view, but for this one, I think I do want to do Robert's point of view. When it's his first day at the reformatory, he's in the kitchen. And like most children, he's just trying to make friends.
Mm.
They exchanged names. The tall boy's name was Redbone, or just Bone. The smaller boy said he was called Blue because he was blue-black, and he surely was. Robert said his nickname was Robbie, but he wanted to be called Robert. He did not want to be Robbie here. We'll get you a better nickname, Blue promised him. Redbone and Blue finally got around to instructing Robert on his duties, one sink for plates, one for cups, one for forks and spoons. There were only two rules to live by, they said. One, don't break the dishes. Two, don't leave grime or spots. Boys who made it past washing dishes could start cooking or mopping the floor. Boys who failed at washing dishes got sent out to the fields. Blue had never been to the fields, but Redbone said he worked on a thresher and never wanted to see corn on the cob again. Blue's family had sent him to Miami from the Bahamas when he was 8, but he'd been brought to the reformatory after his grandmother died. He was waiting on an aunt to come get him from Bimini, but she kept getting delayed. Redbone gave Robert a knowing look as if to say, that ain't true. Redbone, and it isn't true. Redbone, who was from St. Augustine, had taken his neighbor's car joyriding when he was 10, and he'd been sentenced to 2 years. His sentence would be up in December, a month before Robert's. He might go home then, or he might get leased out to the peanut mill or one of the farms. He wasn't sure. The warden would decide based on his behavior record. Both boys looked grim at the mention of Haddock. Robert didn't want to talk about him either. Robert listened to their stories between bouts of thoughtful scrubbing so he could be sure no grains of rice or dried food was stuck between the tines. And I'm just going to skip a little bit up ahead. That was when Robert looked up and saw him. Across the kitchen, Cleo, the bully, was gone. Instead, a white boy in a chef's hat and long white apron stood in his place. He stared dead at Robert as if he'd been waiting to be noticed. His hair was cut short like Blue's, the color of pale sand. He was thin and barefoot, maybe 12 or 13. Robert looked away fast. When trouble started with white boys, colored boys lost out. I thought it was only colored boys in the kitchen, Robert said. Redbone and Blue shrugged. Well, how come they let him in here like he's spying on us? Redbone and Blue stared blankly, so Robert gestured toward the vat with his chin. The white boy was still there, still staring. What white boy? Redbone said. Robert thought they were teasing him, but their faces said different. They didn't see the boy. They looked straight past him. He's right there, Robert said. You say so, Redbone said, and went back to washing. Robert squeezed his eyes tightly, opened them, and looked again. The boy stared on. Robert could see his cool blue eyes from across the room. He had never seen eyes so blue. A tiny clink rang as Redbone lifted a dripping plate he'd rinsed. Just tell him he ain't real, and he'll leave you be, he said, most times. Not real. The boy was as real as he was, casting a shadow against a large metal vat. Robert could see his freckles. Blue spoke hushed. I've seen that white boy. The one with the knife? Heart speeding, Robert checked to see if the boy held a knife. He was relieved to see the boy's hands empty, hanging limply at his sides. He ain't got a knife, Robert said. Must be another one then, Blue said. He checked the plates he'd stacked for chips. White boys must have worked in the kitchen before. I cannot do my Blue accent to save my life. They keep coming back, Redbone said. I bet Haints get hungry, huh, Blue? Haints. Robert's heartbeat was thunder, but he couldn't look away. What did he see in this boy's face? He didn't seem angry. He didn't seem quite sad. His eyes reminded Robert of Mama's when she used to cling to his arm to keep him from pulling away when it was too hard to look at her dying. Redbone went on talking to Blue, unbothered. They must be hungry. They're punching open the rice and flour bags at night, and then we get blamed. That ain't right. If you're dead, stay dead, Blue said. They could be talking about rats or roaches. You're not real, Robert whispered toward the boy, a test. As if Robert had shouted, the white boy turned to walk away, although he had nowhere to go except the back wall. A butcher's knife was buried in his back, the hilt lodged between his shoulders, blade shining in the light. The circle of blood was thick and black near the knife, soaking red down his back, leaving smudged footprints as he walked toward the wall. One stride and he was gone through the whitewashed bricks. Robert gasped. He. Robert clung to the counter to stay upright. His words withered. Yep, he heard Blue say, a tiny voice on the other end of a long tunnel. Told you, Bone, must be the one with the knife. And that is the excerpt from the Reformatory.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so
So
much
thank you.
for being with us today and just taking the time to share your work. I enjoyed it. I hope everybody else enjoyed it as
Well,
well.
thank you. I
And
know that they're quiet, but I know they did.
they
And I
did.
will say as a last thing, I don't know how many of you are local or it's a matter because in this era we have Zoom, so we can be all over the world. So I'm thrilled to share this time with you, and I want to let you know that the next novel does also begin in Gracetown, uh, in the 1920s. But a key difference between the Reformatory and Maisie Wood is that even though we're still in the Jim Crow South, it's 1927 in Gracetown, Florida, this book begins with joy. This book begins with a young girl who begins a journey towards stardom in Hollywood, and it's more of a slow burn as the horror creeps up as she realizes what she's trading away. And then that little creature story thing. But even that is fun to me because creatures in the snow aren't real. You know what I mean? So I think it's just a little bit more. It's scary and bad things happen, but it's a little more fun compared to the reformatory, and I hope you agree. I think we all deserve a break.
Good, 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 good. And for those of you who are not familiar with Wimbia's Market, please sign up for our newsletter. You can visit wimbiasmarket.com and learn about future events. And make sure you pick up Miss Due's book, all of
I
her
look
books.
forward to meeting you in person in your store.
Yay! I look forward to seeing you. I appreciate y'all. Have a wonderful, excellent day.
Great. Thank you. You too. Bye bye, everybody. Thank you for your great questions and for this event.
Yes, ma'am.